The morning was too still, not the calm kind of stillness that comes after rain or before a storm, but the unsettling kind when even the insects seem to hold their breath. Fog slipped through the redwood trees like something alive, pooling around the bases of trunks, licking at the gravel paths. Hiding movement and sound, Mara Whitlow walked the trail the way she always did, boots firm. Body quiet, hands tucked into her canvas jacket. She carried no phone, just a thermos of lukewarm tea and a mind full of things she hadn't yet sorted through. The forest had always held her broken parts in a way people couldn't. She had lived on the edge of Pine Hollow for almost 6 years now, in a cabin tucked between ferns and ancient roots, overlooking the forgotten coastal cliffs of Mendocino County. She wasn't the kind of woman people noticed much average height, lean gray streaks in her dark hair, and a voice so soft it often disappeared into other people's sentences. But the woods knew her, the trail knew her, and the animals, in their own cautious way, knew her too. That's what made the sound so strange. It wasn't loud, it wasn't sharp, just out of place, like a cough swallowed by wind, wet and tiny. Not the rustle of a squirrel or the chirp of a hidden jay. It sounded like breath, struggling. Mara stopped, narrowed her eyes, and listened. There by the rusted wheelbarrow that had been abandoned near the trailhead for years, half swallowed by blackberry vines and moss, something shifted beneath a flattened patch of ferns. She approached slowly, the fog dampening her steps. Kneeling, she parted the plants gently. With her hand, her breath caught in her throat. It was a baby, an animal, but so small it barely looked real, smaller than her palm. Its fur was patchy, damp, and dusted in soil. Its ribs protruded like fragile sticks beneath skin that was too thin, too unfinished. Its tail was short and curled, striped faintly in black, and its ears triangular, soft, with the faintest beginning of a tuft at each tip, trembled with each failing breath. Mara didn't need to be an expert to know what she was looking at, a bobcat cub, and not just a newborn something. Worse, premature. The cub's eyes weren't fully open. Its claws hadn't hardened. Its legs flailed weakly, too soft to lift even its head. Its lungs wheezed with each attempt to inhale, each breath spaced farther apart. Like a metronome slowing towards stillness, Mara's chest tightened. There were no other animals nearby, no tracks, no blood, no mother. Only this cub, curled against a root knot as if it had been gently placed there and left behind. She looked around, heart thudding. Maybe the mother would come back. Maybe this was a bad idea. Maybe she should leave it to nature. But then the cub opened its mouth, not to cry, but to gasp. That was it. That was enough. She slid off her scarf, soft wool, worn from years of use, and reached down with both hands like she was lifting a piece of torn paper. The cub didn't resist. It didn't move at all. She wrapped it tight, close to her chest beneath her jacket, and stood. The trail home felt twice as long. Each step was careful. Her arms braced against her ribs to shield the tiny life she wasn't even sure she was carrying anymore. She couldn't feel warmth from the cub. She couldn't hear anything, and a part of her, cruel and logical, whispered, "She's already gone." But then, just before she reached her porch, she felt it, a flutter, the tiniest twitch like a leaf shifting in the wind. Still here, barely. Her cabin was the last on a sloped road that most GPS maps didn't even register, a place where deliveries didn't reach. The birds always did, surrounded by towering redwoods. It was more moss than house, with a slanted roof and a single chimney that puffed smoke like a tired sigh inside. It was warm-lived and cluttered with the kind of things only someone who rarely left would collect: old seed catalogs, stacked herbal journals, mugs that had grown their own personality through chips and stains, and cats, 6 of them, not hers. Officially, they had wandered in over the past few years and stayed. She fed them, offered warmth, and never asked questions. They came and went through the cracked window screen and the little flap. She'd cut into the back door, each one with its own rhythm, its own way of moving through her silence as she entered the cabin. The cats lifted their heads one by one, eyes blinking. Ears twitching, Mara moved straight to the fireplace. The coals were warm but dim. She added 2 logs, stoked gently, then pulled a thick towel from the basket and folded it twice over. She knelt, set the tiny bundle down, and unwrapped the scarf slowly. There she was, a body too small, 2 quiet eyes crusted shut, nose barely pink, no sound. Mara sat back on her heels. She had no medical training, no background in wildlife care. The most she'd done was nurse a feral kitten back to health a year ago. This was different. This was almost impossible, but impossible things had already happened in her life. She had survived grief that didn't have a name. She had lost a daughter, buried a husband, left a life she once thought would stretch into forever. And still, she was here, still breathing. She reached for her old kettle, filled it, and set it on the stove. While it warmed, she searched her drawers for the smallest bottle she owned, a plastic syringe from when one of the cats had an abscess. She rinsed it clean, then filled it with warm goat milk, diluted with water. But the cub wouldn't drink. Its mouth was too weak to open properly, its throat too narrow to swallow. Mara touched a finger to the milk, then to the cub's lips. Nothing. She wiped the droplets gently, sat beside her, waited. That's when she noticed something strange. Clay, the big orange Tom, had moved closer, just a few inches from the towel. He sat, rigid and alert, tail curled tight. Then came the twins, the sleek black ones, slipping in from opposite corners like ghosts. They didn't touch the cub, didn't sniff her. They simply sat. Ivy, the most skittish, crept low across the floor, inching until she was just beside the cub's hind legs. She curled into herself like a comma and closed her eyes. The others followed one by one. The cats arranged themselves in a loose ring around the towel, a silent formation. Mara watched, breath caught in her throat. It wasn't protection. It wasn't curiosity. It was presence. She sat down across from them, facing the fire, hands on her knees. No one moved. The room grew heavy with something unspoken. Outside, the fog thickened. Inside, the fire cracked. The cub slept, if she was still alive, and the cats held vigil like old souls in fur coats for the first time in years. Mara didn't feel alone, not in the room, not in the moment, not in her pain. The tiny creature before her, this premature wild child, had brought something ancient into the room, something she didn't understand, something she wasn't sure she needed to. She only knew one thing now: she would not let this baby die without knowing what warmth felt like, not while she still had breath. The fire whispered against the logs, casting a soft, flickering light across the room. The cabin was silent except for the occasional crack of wood and the faint sound of breath, Mara's steady, quiet inhales, and the uncertain rhythm of the cubs. The towel beneath the fireplace was slightly damp from the condensation of her own tiny body heat. She hadn't moved since Mara set her down. Her eyes remained sealed shut, the lashes thin and colorless. Every so often, a breath fluttered through her nostrils, like a dying ember reigniting for one more glow. Mara crouched nearby, cup in hand, but she hadn't sipped her tea in nearly an hour. She was afraid to look away, afraid if she blinked for too long, the cub's fragile thread of life might vanish. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like a tide, and it thickened through the afternoon, swallowing the redwoods in silence. In this corner of Mendocino, days could stretch without sun, just mist and sea air, the trees breathing alongside the earth. The house, once a retreat from the world, now felt like a cradle, and inside it, a pulse one too delicate for nature's hard rules. The cats hadn't moved. Mara had expected curiosity, perhaps a paw reaching toward the new scent, but they didn't do any of that. Instead, they maintained a strange, reverent distance, 6 of them forming a perimeter, not touching, not blinking, Just watching hours passed, Mara had tried to feed the cub again, only a fingertip dipped in diluted goat milk, barely moistening the cub's cracked lips. The first 2 tries were useless. The third, the tiniest twitch of her tongue, but even that small act seemed to exhaust her completely. Mara had worked in a hospice clinic when she was younger. Before her life splintered, she remembered watching breath patterns, listening for changes in the quiet. This cub's body moved like someone half here, half gone. Every rise of her ribs seemed to carry the weight of decision. Should I stay? Or should I slip away? And the cats, they stayed. Ivy, the soft, long-haired calico, rarely came this close to anyone. She was the last to join, but the first to lie down. Her chin pressed into her paws just inches from the towel. Her eyes never left the cub Clay. The big ginger remained upright, tail flicking once every 5 minutes. He didn't blink either. The black twins pressed close to one another, but didn't lean in. Their posture was still like a ritual, something instinctual, and yet beyond instinct. Like they knew, this one doesn't belong to us, but she must not be alone. It unnerved Mara, the silence of it, the absolute. Knowing in it, she whispered, almost to herself, "Why are you doing this?" No answer. Only Ivy shifted, the slightest stir of fur in the firelight. By evening, Mara lit the kerosene lamp near the window. The power had flickered 3 times, and she didn't trust the lines to hold through the night. She set water to boil again, warming the milk by touch. She no longer used the dropper. She dipped a cotton swab and lightly brushed it against the cub's mouth. The cub licked it, barely, but it was enough. Mara closed her eyes and whispered, "Good girl." She hadn't meant to say it. The words fell out of her like breath. Unformed and raw, she hadn't said those words since the night her daughter was born, too early and too still. Years ago in a hospital room, too wide to feel real. The memory lived in her bones, not because she remembered every detail, but because her body never forgot. She had told no one what it felt like to hold a child that would never cry. But now, she was holding another, not human, not even fully here, but alive barely, and somehow, that memory, that pain, didn't feel like a weight in her chest anymore. It felt like fuel by midnight. The cub stirred, not a full motion, just a twitch of one leg, a low wheeze, then the press of her nose into the towel. Mara leaned forward. She didn't want to wake her, but every movement now felt like a small miracle. And then Ivy moved. The cat stood slowly, stretched then, to Mara's stunned silence, patted forward until her flank was lightly touching the edge of the towel. She didn't curl around the cub, nor lick her. She just lay beside her, guarding. That's when the others followed one by one. They moved not to swarm, not to smother, just to touch the edge of the towel, to close the circle. Clay took position at the top. The twins curled on either side. The smallest, a gray and white stray that came only at night, took the foot, all of them in contact, surrounding her. The circle was no longer metaphorical. It was literal, a ring of fur and breath, wrapping the fragile cub in a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. Mara's throat closed. She didn't know what this was, an accident, a behavior rooted in evolution, or something older, a memory that existed in animals the way music did in humans. A feeling without language. She thought of wolves and how they circled sick pups, of elephants mourning their dead, of how her own cat, long ago, had lain beside her daughter's crib for days. Even after she was gone, animals knew Mara barely slept that night. She stayed by the fireplace, cross-legged, cat-numbed, staring at the cub, whose name she hadn't dared to give, around 2:40 a.m. The cub whimpered a high, soft whine that cracked the air like glass, and Ivy, bless her strange, sensitive heart, responded. She made a low chirp, a short purr, then leaned just close enough to nudge her shoulder against the towel. The cub quieted. That was the moment Mara decided. The cub would be named June, not after the season, or the month, But after the juniper tree small hardy, low to the ground, surviving where others withered. Something wild, something evergreen, something meant to endure the wind morning, came like a whispered promise. Pale light bled through the fog, casting the forest in a sleepy blue. Mara boiled tea she didn't drink. The cats slept where they had circled, and June, still breathing. Mara checked her again, eyes still sealed, tongue slightly pinker, paws twitching ever so slightly. In sleep, she called the Wildlife Rescue Center 3 towns over, explained everything. They asked the cubs' weight, breathing pattern, feeding behavior. The woman on the phone spoke gently, but her voice held the weight of realism. Cubs born that early, especially in the wild, don't usually make it. Ma'am, it's not that you're doing anything wrong, it's just sometimes they're not meant to stay. Mara thanked her and hung up. But the cats hadn't heard that call. They were still there. One by one, they opened their eyes as Mara began to speak softly to June, stroking a finger along her spine. "Don't listen to them," she whispered. "You weren't supposed to make it last night either, but you did." The fog outside began to break, not fully, not enough to reveal the sun, but enough to let the cabin breathe, and in that breath, surrounded by warmth and instinct and the quiet protection of creatures that had no reason to care, June lived. June didn't cry. That's what haunted Mara the most during the long stretch of nights that followed. There were no shrill meows, no hungry wails, not even the desperate sounds a human baby would make to signal its fading grip on life. The cub was quiet, too quiet, but she breathed, shallow, slow, uneven. But she breathed. It became Mara's new metric of time, one breath, then the next. That was how the hours passed, not by clocks or sunlight, but by whether Chun's chest rose and fell. Mara never intended to become a caretaker. She hadn't even planned on leaving the house that day, but that strange call in the ferns, barely a sound at all, had reopened something inside her. Something long locked away since her own child had slipped between life and memory. And now here she was, bottle feeding an impossible life every 90 minutes. Each attempt to gamble against death. She kept the cabin warm, using a mix of low wood fires and thick blankets. She insulated a cardboard box with fleece and placed it near the hearth, reshaping it until the edges curled upward like a nest. June was placed at its center, always surrounded by at least one of the cats, usually Ivy or Clay, sometimes both. The cats had taken shifts. Mara noticed it on day 3. Without prompting, without training, they rotated places, never crowding, never interrupting. It was as if they'd appointed themselves keepers of this fragile spark. They didn't cuddle her. They didn't nudge or paw. They simply stayed close, bodies radiating warmth, their calm breathing a rhythm for her underdeveloped lungs to follow. And June responded, slightly, barely, but undeniably. By the 5th day, she twitched when Ivy shifted beside her. Her paws jerked, almost instinctively, when Clay sneezed a few feet away. Her whiskers flared when Mara placed a damp cloth on her belly to stimulate digestion, an exhausting task the cub could not yet do on her own. The nights were hardest. Mara didn't sleep in her bed anymore. She made a spot by the fireplace with old cushions and a sleeping bag. The cats allowed it. They slept nearby. Some even pressed lightly against her legs. She hadn't realized how much she needed their presence until the first night she woke in a panic. Unable to hear June breathing, she scrambled to the box, heart galloping, only to find June nestled deep into Ivy's side, her tiny body gently rising and falling beneath a shield of striped fur. Mara knelt, let out a broken laugh, and wept quietly into her hands. This was something she had thought would never come again, a reason to care, to fight, to hope. It was terrifying. Feeding June became a science. Mara warmed the goat milk. Carefully, just above room temperature, she crushed feline milk. Replace her into it, guided by late-night research on outdated wildlife forums and veterinary blogs. The dropper was too big, so she swapped to a plastic pipette when June still didn't suckle. She switched to micro-feeding one drop at a time along her lips, praying for instinct to kick in. Eventually, it did on the 7th day. Jun opened her mouth, not wide, not strong, but with intent, her tongue flicked against the pipette, drawing in 2 drops before falling limp with exhaustion. It was a victory so small most would have missed it. Mara nearly collapsed from the joy. She danced a circle in her kitchen, bare feet on cold wood, laughing and crying and scaring. 3 of the cats off the countertop. It wasn't much. It wasn't enough, but it was something. A flame where there had only been ash. The forest outside remained unchanged. The fog still moved through the branches like a living thing. Owls still called from high places. The wind moaned low through the redwoods each night, and the earth smelled of salt and pine. But the cabin had changed. There was a rhythm now, not one Mara controlled, but one she followed. Chun's feedings every 2 hours, her temperature checks every 4. The cats responding with a sense of communal duty, arriving like clockwork to keep her from cooling. The fireplace kept burning around the clock, the herbs, long ignored, drying quietly in corners, and in the center of it all, June, small, soft, unfinished, fighting with everything she didn't yet understand. But progress was not linear. On day 9, June stopped responding. She didn't lift her head. She didn't twitch. Her eyes, still sealed, bulged slightly with crust. Her breaths became fewer. A rattle formed in her lungs. Mara panicked. She boiled water, added eucalyptus to the air, tried a humidifier she hadn't touched in years. Nothing worked. Jun refused to eat. She refused to move. Mara sat beside her until morning, one hand hovering over her ribcage, just to feel the rise and fall. And sometime between dawn and not quite sleep, she whispered again, "Please don't leave me." 2. That was Alma. Dramatic begging. No shaking. Just the quiet release of fear she hadn't realized she was carrying. Jun didn't move, but she didn't stop breathing either. By midday, the fever broke. On the 10th morning, Mara saw something new. Jun was awake. Not fully, but she was shifting, trying to roll. Her paws curled beneath her body, her spine bent. Her nose lifted into the air like it had caught something unfamiliar scent. Mara placed the pipette near her lips. This time, Jun licked it again and again. 6 drops, then 8, then 10. Tiny paws pushed weakly at Mara's fingers. And then, June made a sound, not a meow, not a growl, but a chirp, soft, questioning. Mara choked on a sob. Her vision blurred. Ivy was already at the box's edge, tail thumping once. Clay soon joined. The twins slipped in from opposite corners, one by one. The cats resumed their circle, as if they, too, had been waiting for this sound, this sign. Mara took her tea to the porch that evening. She hadn't done that in months. She sat with her knees tucked to her chest, eyes scanning the redwoods, listening to the wind rustling branches like fingers combing through hair. She thought about the way grief changes shape, how it never truly leaves, only folds itself into quieter corners. Jun had done something that Mara, even with years of therapy, widowhood, and solitude, hadn't managed on her own. She had reopened the part of her that believed in beginnings, that something broken could still be held, that warmth could follow cold, and somewhere deep inside, beneath the science and logic and sorrow, Mara began to wonder if those cats had known all along, not just what Jun needed, but what she did. Too, not a replacement for what was lost, but a reason to feel again. The fire was dying, just a faint hum in the hearth. The cats were still asleep, curled like commas across the worn rugs and the windowsill, where condensation streaked the glass. Outside, the fog had receded into a pale sky laced with soft blue one. Of those rare Mendocino mornings, when light filtered gently through the redwoods, instead of being swallowed by them, Mara stood at the stove in silence, hand resting on the chipped kettle as it warmed. Her back ached, her knees popped when she bent, but her eyes were bright with something she hadn't felt in years. Expectation. It had been 18 days. Jun had not only survived, she had begun to grow. Her fur had thickened, the dusty gray-brown of avos. It now darkening around the shoulders and haunches. Her ears stood more upright, tipped with soft, dark markings. Her ringed tail had filled in slightly, no longer looking like a worm but like something belonging to a wild thing. And now she made sounds low, half-formed chirps when she was hungry, a breathy grumble when Mara wiped her down with a damp cloth. She pawed at Ivy's tail sometimes, clumsily batting at the twitching end with no real intent. Ivy tolerated it. Clay ignored it. The others remained nearby, always near, but their circle had loosened. The vigil was over. The watch had become something else. Something less sacred, but no less tender. Mara brought the warm milk mixture to Chun's box by the fire. Ivy shifted, lazily stretching one long leg across the floor before hopping down and heading toward the window ledge. Mara bent, whispering, as she always did, "Morning, little one." But this time, June wasn't curled in the towel. She was upright, wobbly, shaking, but unmistakably upright, both front paws pressed into the edge of the fleece. Her hind legs trembled with the effort of standing, her spine curved in an uncertain arch. Her eyes, finally opened fully just 3 days ago, blinked slowly, adjusting to the pale light. They were green, not the sharp, gold-tinged hue Mara expected, but a mossy, curious green, soft, deep. Watching Jun made a small sound, almost like a breath with a question inside. Mara dropped to her knees. "Oh my God." Her hands hovered in the air, unsure whether to touch or just witness. But June didn't fall. She didn't crumple back into the towel. She held her position for a full 10 seconds, then 15. Then she turned her head and looked at Mara. Actually, looked. Something passed between them, then something ancient and wordless. Not gratitude, not dependence. Something deeper. Recognition. The shared knowledge of what it means to survive against odds no one believed in. And then, June took a step, one paw forward, and immediately fell into the fleece. Mara laughed, startled. Full-bellied laughter that burst through the morning like sunlight. She clapped a hand over her mouth, tears springing from her eyes. "You little monster," she whispered. "You weren't supposed to live, and now look at you." The cats began gathering again that day, but it was different now. They no longer formed the protective ring. Instead, they gathered around the edges of the room, watching, observing, occasionally offering a tail flick or a nudge when June wandered too close. Ivy, ever the reluctant mother figure, tolerated Jun curling beside her once. Clay offered a lazy lick to Chun's ear before sauntering off. Tail high. It was as if they understood something was changing. The cub was no longer theirs. To protect she was becoming something else. Over the next few days, Chun's progress accelerated. Each morning, she grew bolder, exploring beyond the fleece box, stumbling into the kitchen, curling into Mura's bathrobe left carelessly on a chair. Her paws grew more coordinated. Her tail gained balance. Her voice sharpened, a mix of trills and soft growls, strange for a house filled with quiet cats. Mara found herself constantly adjusting the environment, sealing off stairs, patting corners, placing pillows around firewood piles like a worried parent. And she was worried, not because Jun was weak anymore, but because she she was strong now. Curious, wild. Too wild. On day 24, Mara tried something new. She opened the back door. Just a crack. June had never seen the outside. Fog, wind, birds, these were all sounds and smells she had known only from the windows. The moment the door creaked open, her nose lifted. She sniffed the air like it held secrets. Mara crouched beside her. "That's your world," she said, quietly. "Not mine." June didn't run to it. She didn't dart like a kitten chasing wind. She stared, observed, took it in. And then, backed away. That was when Mara's heart broke a little, not from pain, but from knowing something she couldn't unknow. John didn't belong in this cabin. Not forever. That night, Mara sat with her journal open but unwritten. She had not written in months. Maybe years. The page remained blank, the pen resting across the top like a question she hadn't found the answer to. Behind her, June slept curled on a stack of towels in front of the hearth. Her breathing was strong now, rhythmic, her chest rising. With the surety of something meant to live. Mara looked at her and whispered, "You're not mine. I know that. But you're still part of me now." She called the sanctuary the next morning. It took 3 tries to get through. When she finally spoke to someone, her voice was calm, measured, but inside she was unraveling. Yes, she was premature. Yes, I've kept her warm, fed her. She's eating on her own now, walking. She even climbed a kitchen chair yesterday. There was a pause. Then the woman on the line spoke with that kind, practiced tone Mara had heard before. "You did something remarkable. Most of them don't make it. You gave her a chance she wouldn't have had in the wild. That's rare. Will she be okay with humans?" Mara asked, her voice suddenly small. "She needs time, but she's young enough." "Not imprinted, from what you've said. She still has a chance to return to the wild fully." Mara nodded, even though no one could see her. "Okay, we can send a wildlife officer to transport her in the next few days." Mara hung up. Then sat still for a long time, her hand resting on the warm spot on the rug where June had just been curled. The night before June's departure, the cats gathered one last time. Not around the box, but around June. She was stronger now. Standing steadily on all fours, practicing her stalk on a piece of rolled-up wool sock, Ivy watched with calm disinterest. Clay napped nearby. The black twins lounged by the fire. It wasn't a circle of protection anymore. It was a family letting go. Mara didn't say anything. She just watched, absorbed, memorized. She didn't photograph John, didn't record anything. It didn't feel right. Some memories needed to be kept in the heart, not on a screen. Later that night, as the cabin dimmed and the cats tucked themselves into their usual places, June padded slowly over to Mara's makeshift bed near the hearth. She pressed her small body wild and warm against Mara's ribs, just once, then curled there and slept. The morning June was to leave came not with fog, but with gold. The early light filtered through the redwoods in soft columns, laying stripes across the floor of the cabin like quiet reminders that the world outside was still moving. The trees swayed gently. Birds called from somewhere high. Even the cats, who usually slept in well-established places, seemed unsettled, restless in a way Mara couldn't explain. She hadn't packed anything. There was nothing to send with June. No toys. No towel, no blanket that could hold her scent. She didn't want her to carry the smell of a cabin or a human's touch. She wanted her to be wild. Free. Hold. The wildlife transport vehicle pulled in just after 9. Not loud, not urgent. Just a dark green SUV with state plates and a quiet man in a beige jacket. He stepped out respectfully, glancing around the property like someone entering sacred ground. "You're Mara?" he asked. She nodded, not trusting her voice. He carried a regulation-size wildlife crate, padded with straw and lined with pine branches. Inside was a single stuffed sock, designed to mimic the warmth of another cub. It looked alien to Mara, sterile and necessary. "She's ready?" he asked gently. Mara turned back toward the cabin and exhaled. Yes. June didn't resist when Mara picked her up. She was heavier now, stronger, nearly 5 weeks old, and already her shoulders moved with power, her eyes sharper than any house cat's. She was a bobcat now in every sense except one. She looked back. As Mara lowered her into the crate, June turned her head. Their eyes met. Mara expected fear or confusion or maybe even anger. But what she saw was trust. The kind born not of domestication, but of shared survival. Two beings pulled back from the edge of the same dark cliff. Two lives that should not have overlapped, but did. And for a brief moment, neither had to be alone. The crate door clicked shut. Jun chirped once soft and brief, then settled into the straw. The SUV disappeared down the forest road in a trail of dust and morning haze. Mara stood on the porch long after it was gone. She didn't cry right away. The cat stood with her. Ivy brushed against her leg. Clay jumped to the railing and perched like a watchman. The black twins sat at her feet. The circle was no more. The bond remained, fractured, changed, yet whole in its own new shape. She went back inside. The cabin was painfully quiet. The towel still lay by the hearth. The fleece box was empty. The air smelled like wood smoke and pine, but something else had left. The pulse, the silent rhythm of those impossible days, was gone. That night, she dreamed of breath-thin, fluttering breath and soft fur, and 6 cats forming a silent shield. She woke with tears on her cheeks. Weeks passed. Mara didn't speak much about Jun. Not to the sanctuary, not to the neighbors, not even in the handwritten letters she sometimes sent to the small animal rescue group she supported. She didn't share pictures. She didn't post updates. It didn't feel like a story to tell. It felt like a prayer. She began walking the trail again. Every morning, she brought the scarf she had found Jun in, now washed but still marked by the faintest stain of her first days. She carried it in her pocket, not out of habit, but because she didn't know how to let go completely. The cats returned to their rhythms. Clay ruled the porch. Ivy stalked moths in the kitchen. The twins disappeared and reappeared like shadows, but something had shifted. The house felt lived in now, awake, as if the breath of a near death miracle had left its imprint in the walls. On the 49th day, a letter arrived, not official, not typed. Just a folded note card with the sanctuary's logo and a handwritten note inside. She's thriving. Plays rough. Eats like a lion. No signs of behavioral dependency. We'll begin the slow release process next week. You gave her a real chance. Thank you. There was no photo, no signature. Just that. Mara read it 3 times. Then folded it, pressed it between the pages of her journal, and walked barefoot out into the yard. She didn't speak. She didn't sing. She simply stood beneath the redwoods and tilted her face to the light. A few days later, something strange happened. It was early, just after sunrise. The forest was blue and still. Mara was sitting on the porch, sipping tea. Her cats scattered lazily across the steps, and then movement. Down by the edge of the trail, where the blackberries met the tree line, something stepped out. Not confidently, not with menace. Just presence. A young bobcat. Thin, but not weak. Mottled in the sun. Her eyes were green. Mara didn't move. She didn't speak. She held her breath as the cat stepped forward once, twice, then paused. They looked at each other. The cat tilted her head. No collar. No tags. No crate. Just a heartbeat. Then, without a sound, she turned and disappeared into the brush. Mara sat there for a long time after. She didn't chase. She didn't call. She just whispered, "Goodbye," and then added, softer, "You were never mine." That night she lit a candle by the fireplace. Ivy curled beside her. Clay snored from the rug. The circle had broken, but the love hadn't. It had simply changed shape into something wild, untamed, an eternal. And somewhere beneath, the breath of redwoods and the hush of earth, a once premature cub was running, leaping, hunting, alive.